Some of you, I think, are old enough to remember that movement back in the late 80s and 90s. What would Jesus do? Anybody remember that? Maybe you even got some bracelets at home that still have WWJD on them, or a coffee mug or a t-shirt. That whole thing, I thought, started back then in the 80s. It actually started 100 years earlier. There was a Congregationalist minister in Topeka, Kansas, who had this idea, and he wrote a book about it. So the idea was that when you have a moral decision to make, when you're in a dilemma, you don't know what to do, ask yourself, what would Jesus do? And then do that to the best of your ability. Well, I think it ties in with the readings that we've heard for today. Jesus is a good shepherd. He leads us in his path. But to get on that path and stay on it, we need to make good decisions. We need to ask ourselves, what would Jesus do if he were here in my place? And then follow in his footsteps. The 23rd Psalm, which is the psalm for today, no question is the most beloved, most well-known of all the psalms. Even people who don't read the Bible know about the 23rd Psalm. It was written 1,000 years before Jesus was even born. And it refers to the shepherd, to the good shepherd, that we would know is Jesus. And in the psalm, as you heard, the good shepherd only wants what's good for us. He wants to lead us to good pasture, wants us to have our table set with good food and good drink. He wants to help us through the dark valleys, and we've all been in dark valleys, and we probably have more ahead of us. He's there for us, and he's leading us. And I think there's something that's appealed to people over the centuries and the millennia about this psalm. We all want someone to lead us, someone to show us what to do when we're lost, someone to help us out of the wilderness. And that's our good shepherd. We're all aware of our shortcomings. We're aware of how many times we try and do things on our own and how many times we screw it up when we do that. So the comforting words of the psalm, I think, are very special. Unfortunately, they fly in the face of what our culture tells us. Our culture says, no, you don't need God, you don't need anybody else, you can do it all by yourself. All you have to do is work hard, and you'll make it. Frank Sinatra's famous song, I Did It My Way. Well, that's a lie. Nobody ever did anything all by themselves. Nothing of value happens that way. So it's a myth that we can do things our way. We need to do things God's way. We all know how easy it is to get lost and to be alone and not know what to do next. And then in that second reading, Peter tells us what happens when we try to take matters into our own hands and follow our own guidance instead of God's. He says we scatter like sheep without a shepherd. We become separated from each other. We wander. We're lost. We don't know where the shelter or the food or the pasture is. And we'll come to a bad end. As Jesus says in the gospel, the ones who don't go in through the gate, which is him, the ones that don't go in that way are thieves and robbers, and they're there to damage the sheep, injure them, kill them. There have always been thieves and robbers, and there still are today. And Peter goes on to say, don't expect that because you're Christians you're going to live lives without suffering. Quite the opposite. You will have suffering. You're going to be suffering for doing what's good, as Jesus did. If we really follow in his footprints, put our feet into the prints that he makes, we too will have suffering in our lives for doing good, for telling the truth. for saying what's right and what's wrong, what's honest and what's dishonest. We'll pay a price for that. But that's the way that we're called to live, to be people for others, as the Jesuits have it. That's a very different way of living than the way this culture tells us we should live. There was a group in Baltimore I read about just a week or two ago called We Are Us. And it's a group of people that were formed several years ago, and the idea was that they would help young black men break the cycle of violence and early death that so plagues Baltimore and other cities. And so they've got a hotline that people call when they're in trouble, and sometimes they can be talked down from that bad place that they're at. These folks also walk in the streets of the very tough neighborhoods, trying to de-escalate violence before it breaks out into somebody getting shot. What would Jesus do if he were faced with this situation? I think he'd be right there walking with them, trying to help people find a nonviolent way to solve their disagreements. But you notice that group, We Are Us, they don't try to do it by themselves. They walk in a body, just like we're part of a body, part of the body of Christ. Someone once asked Mother Teresa, "Mother, how much should we give? You say we should give and give, but how much?" And Mother Teresa said, "Here's the answer: give till it hurts. Give till you know that you're doing something. Give until you can feel it. Give until it touches you." And some would say, well, that's just a way to be a masochist. But anybody that's looked at Mother Teresa's face with her broad smile would say, there's a woman who's found peace and happiness by giving till it hurts. What would Jesus do? I think that's what he would say. And he gave us the example of giving until it hurts, giving until there's nothing left to give. What would Jesus do? He would give until there's nothing more to give. And so should we.